today's topic, I really want to focus on two different pieces of research I have done recently in the Urban Big Data Center after I joined here. So the first part is about field poverty, and the second part is about pandemic mobility. And both of the research leverage some of the very, I would say it's not very easy to access data set. And we have a data service center in Scotland, and we have those access to it. But we also open that to everyone to apply to it. And I start with the title as the new insight for private rental market and greenspace visitation for new forms of urban big data. And you can find out this is really think about by using the new forms of big data to actually tackle some of the existing, urban questions. Just a quick self-introduction, and Qunshan has given a pretty good introduction of myself, and just give you some of the sense of myself. And I originally from China, and then I spent 4 years in Wuhan University, finished my undergrad, and really more focused on the remote sensing photogrammetry major. And then I joined Arizona State, and I stayed there for about 7 years, and majority doing my PhD in GI science, but really benefit from a lot of the statistical optimization course from industrial engineering. And I have about 2 years postdoc training in social science and resilience, also in Arizona State. And I joined here in Urban Big Data Center and Urban Studies in the University of Glasgow. Actually, I would say it's pretty good time to say that right now it's actually pre-pandemic. So half a year before the pandemic, I joined here, and then the remaining times actually we all kind of stay at home and work from home. So today's outline, I'll start with the first research on the field poverty research. And it's really about exploration of field poverty in the private rental housing market in the city of Glasgow by using the Zoopla data and the EPC data. Just want to give you some of the background of the field poverty. And so there's kind of a long discussion in academic literature, like what is really a field poverty. And from the right-hand side, you can see this finger is that really in the UK, this is like a big thing, because we have from just this finger, we can see that it's 6.5 million people back to 2012, they are actually under field poverty. And then in 2016, it's about 9 million people under field poverty. But how to really define a field poverty is really change these fingers. And from a 1991 Bowman paper, it really define the inability of a household to obtain adequate energy service for 10% of their income. And there are different drivers of field poverty, including, energy efficiency of your house, your income, which includes your earnings and benefits, the energy cost, for sure, how much your energy, the electricity price, and how energy is used in your home. That if you really use it heavily, and that may just make you more possibility in a field poverty. But I want to highlight here is that it says the 10% of the income, but this is not very clear as what is the income. And then when I look at more detailed in Scotland, what is the field poverty in Scotland? Actually, back to 2018, there's a new target for field poverty in Scotland from one of the government policy document. And it says by 2040, no more than 5% of the Scottish household will be in the field poverty. That's what they want to do. And the other thing is that they really redefine the field poverty by really just field cost must be more than 10% of the household net income after deducting housing costs. So basically, your income deduct your housing costs, and that will be your kind of the real income to use to calculate this kind of 10%. And also there's slightly different definitions. That the remaining household net income after the fuel and the childcare payment is not enough to maintain your acceptable standard of living for the household, which is quite, I would say this is quite general. So what is the acceptable standard of living? And this is, I don't feel this is very clear. So in this analysis, I really use the first criteria to help myself to kind of understand if really a household under the field poverty. And on the right-hand side is really showing the age of the Scottish houses. And you can find out across different categories, you'll find out a lot of really old houses like pre-1919. So it's basically, I would say more than 100 years. So some of those houses can be really like, so you can have really low energy efficiency. And that really making the government really needs to think of like how to really improve their energy efficiency to make sure people don't spend a lot of money just to, heat their house during the winter, I would say. About the private rental market, so I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. So the main issue in the private rental market to improve the energy performance is actually it's less incentive for landlord to improve energy efficiency. Basically, the landlord mostly care about like if their tenants will really pay the rents, right? And tenants sometimes they want to do something, but it's hard for them to do due to the tenancy agreements that they cannot really alter the house without without agreement with the landlord. And also, mostly those kind of improvement, the money should come from the landlord rather than from the tenants. So this is really kind of prevent the landlord to really improve the house quality in the private rental market. And the current improvement plan in Scotland, so I think the October 2020 says, okay, at least E for all the private rental houses. And by 2022 March, at least E for all the properties. And they have this kind of aims to keep improving to D and C in 2030 and B in 2040. So generally speaking, you can see this is the like I said, energy efficiency rankings from A to G, and you can see there's a clear. If you know the EPC document is pretty long, it actually evaluates all sorts of the different perspective of your house. So this is really to understand how efficient your house it is. But the traditional ways to understand the fuel poverty mostly through the household survey and some of the official statistics, such as, maybe some of the, there's also including like electricity companies, they evaluate the energy cost from their kind of customers, and they sometimes share the data with the academics, and then we can use that data to understand. And mostly a lot of these qualitative conceptual discussions exist in a academic literature. But what's next here? So it's really, I think as a quantitative researcher, we really think about what kind of new forms of data we can use to improve the understanding of fuel poverty. And here, so to do this research, I leveraged two different data sets. The first one is the Zoopla private rental listing data, which you may use Zoopla when you try to buy a house or try to rent a house. So this is kind of one of the very big UK online housing website. And energy performance certificate, which is available online openly, I say, and for both Scotland, England, Wales, I believe. So by using these two data sets, and I try to understand, I say, what's the situation in Glasgow in terms of fuel poverty across different areas. And just some quick information about Zoopla dataset. And Zoopla is, as I said, is one of the leading aggregators of property listing data, and giving free access to information on 27 million homes and up to 1 million property listing and 15 years of sold price data. And we can, as in UBDC, we have the license to share the Zoopla data for non-commercial academic research. So if you're interested, feel free to find out on our website. And in this particular research, I used the data from January 2010 to March 2019. And we actually have the data until 2021, and I haven't got a chance to really incorporate the data into it. And there's a few reasons, because we have the pandemic starting March 2020, and certainly I think the entire market is changing a lot. So I'm really kind of think about like how will I really incorporate the new data into the analysis. But you can see the data set, it's 188 CSVs and 44 gigabytes, cover the entire England, Wales, Scotland, and the finest geographical unit is the full postcode. And the EPC data is available through the Scottish Government website. And it has, I use the data here is from 2012 to 2020 March. But actually, I think they recently released the newest 2021 data, which is the most recent one. And the EPC data is 2.5 gigabyte coverage in entire Scotland. And the geography unit in my current data set in this analysis is postcode sector. You can see they remove the last 2 digits. But back to the 2021 data they released, they actually include a full postcode. So that makes the more finer, the finer analysis possible in the near future. So a few other data sets I use, which is the weekly household average income estimate from Scottish Household Survey back to 2014. And the things like in the Scottish census, they don't include the income, which makes it slightly difficult to actually connect the income data with all these other analysis. And I also use these kind of Scottish postcode directory files to help connect all the geography together. And some of like kind of tedious thing, but if you think yourself as a data scientist, you really need to spend a lot of time with your data and certainly to clean it. And I say the Zoopla data cleaning is really from big data to small data, because the original data is like 44 something gigabyte and 1.3 million rows. But when we really narrow down to Glasgow regions, it's only 124K rows. And then if we really go to Glasgow cities, it's even less, 71,000. And if we really narrow down to the rental properties, it's only 18,000. And after removing those kind of missing values, outliers, and time range, wrong time range is only 15,000. And I calculate the yearly rental cost at the postcode sector level from the Zoopla data. And then a few other data cleaning and aggregation, just to combine the EPC data with the Zoopla data. And the first thing is really to filter the EPC data to match with the Zoopla data time range. And I calculate the unit energy cost per year per square meter from the EPC data, which is available directly. I just do some simple calculation. And I join the EPC and Zoopla data based on the postcode sector. And then the next step is really to calculate the energy cost per year based on the bedroom number from the Zoopla data set and the unit energy cost in each postcode sector. And for the bedroom, and I use a kind of a quick estimation. I say if I have 1 bedroom, I assume it can be your flat, your house. I just very general 1 bedroom with 35 square meter and 2 bedrooms with 70 square meters. And I calculate that based on this kind of simple estimation. And then I connect the weekly income data and the postcode shapefile with the EPC and also Zoopla dataset. And then finally, I can start to calculate some of the fuel poverty measures by ratios between the energy, the rental versus the income. So the fuel poverty measures I use is actually very, I think it's just very straightforward. Like if I have the alpha as the yearly energy cost and beta as the yearly rental cost and gamma as the yearly household income, and I would say the energy poverty, I create this word, maybe you can think of other words to really describe it, but energy poverty will be your yearly energy cost divided by your yearly household income. And the rental poverty will be actually your yearly rental cost divided by your yearly household income. And the fuel poverty, I really use the Scottish government new definition minus the rental cost, which is your net income. And then I use the energy cost divided by alpha minus beta. So some of the results here. So on the left-hand side is the energy poverty, as I mentioned. So you can find out from the geography, the east end of the Glasgow is really kind of spend more money towards the energy. That's a percentage, I would say. You can see it's like from like 1.5% all the way go to 3.5% of the income. And you can find that they spend about 3% of their income towards the energy. And there's also other areas such as the northwest of Glasgow and also west of Glasgow. So the city centers around here, and the west end is actually this area. But if you look at the rental cost, you can find out, it's kind of like you have the highest rental cost in the city center and gradually decrease to the outskirts of the Glasgow city. But if we really look at the final results of fuel poverty based on the new Scottish government standard, you can find out this map is getting a bit scattered, dark colors and light yellow colors. So you can find out in the really around the city center and also the north of the city center, we observe the highest fuel poverty. I would say this is not really 10%. It's about the highest about 4.4% to 5.7%. So does it actually mean there's no any of a household really fall into the fuel poverty category? And this is something I don't believe so. And so that makes me think of like, I need to really go back to look at the data and see why this really happens. And so just give you a quick summary. And I think the fuel poverty has been observed certainly near the Glasgow city center, and as well as the north of the city center and northwest of the Glasgow city. Even though they are not more than 10%, I would say those are kind of the key areas we need to focus on from our data set. And high rental cost has been confirmed in the city center and gradually decreased from the city center to the outskirts. And as I mentioned, up to 6% of the income is used to pay energy cost after deduction of the rental cost. And this is not as expected as like more than 10%, but we certainly need to investigate more by using some other official data to do the validation. And the results illustrate the value of using new forms of big data to understand fuel poverty, and more generally, like say, a new way to understand the private rental housing market. And a few limitations, as I mentioned. So one thing I think make this happen, the results happen, is that Zoopla and EPC data are both part of the overall samples. So I think for the EPC data, every time when you rent a place to someone else, you will need to update your EPC if it is like 5 years old. And if you sell your house, you will need to get a new EPC. But I think a lot of the Scottish house, they still don't have any EPCs. So that really make a bias here. And also for Zoopla data, only those houses kind of advertised on the website will receive this, will have these kind of records. So I believe the validation is very important. And today I just find out on Scottish Housing Condition Survey, they have a new fuel poverty data published just a few months ago. I will need to actually look into it and see how to actually improve the results. Some of the duplicate EPC records may exist in the database because we have the data from 2010 until right now. And the field of the potential future work. The first thing is that we can really extend the study area to other major cities of Scotland, and potentially the methodology can be applied to England and Wales because we have the Zoopla for the entire UK. And also for the, in the England and Wales, we also have the EPC data available. And using a smaller spatial scale will be very interesting, like such as using a full postcode with the new EPC data released in Scotland in 2021. And a further understanding of the fuel poverty with the more like high resolution social demographic data, such as the CASI ACOM data, which is very good classification at the data zone level. I think at the postcode level. And also we can think of like say SIMD, which is at say data zone level, and also Scottish census is in intermediate zone level. So it's like actually different, I would say different spatial dimensions of the social demographic data can be used to understand more details in terms of who is actually under the fuel poverty. So I have a GitHub repository to really showing the code how to do all of this research. And there's a conference paper focused on Bristol. It's not on this particular research, but we have a pretty similar research methods, and feel free to check it out. So this is the first research I have about the fuel poverty. But in the second part, I really want to focus more on the, say, COVID thing, right? The pandemic. So recently we obtained the mobile phone app data from Hark and the Tomoko, and by using those data, we can do many different things. But in this research, we're really exploring the pandemic human-nature interactions, like how people use greenspace in city of Glasgow by using the mobile phone app data. And I want to give a lot of credit to Michael Sinclair, which is the postdoc, start working in UBDC back to December 2020, I believe, but he has been doing really great job in terms of analysis and making a lot of these slides and figures. So first I want to introduce you some of the general ideas of the mobile phone app data. So you may just really interested in how those data will look like. And this is one of actually the intensity map of the mobile phone app data. So the data I use in this research is called a Hark data set. So this is not really directly from like your phone calls or text. This is not like the CDR data, but it is more like you have basically it generates from your mobile phone app with your phone, and when your phone opens if you allow the locations for different apps, they will collect your locations and time, and then you will all aggregate to these kind of mobile phone providers, and they really pack it up and then sell it as a product. So it basically collects the location and timestamp, which we will refer as an impression. And for the Hark data set, for the 2019 and 2020 data, we have about 170 billion impression. So you can think of like every data point containing the GPS location and the time will be one impression. So we have about 170 million impressions. And we are continuing to receive data every day. So we eventually will have a full year of the 2021 data for the entire Glasgow city region, and data update daily, as I said. And the source of the data from apps, which is very important for us to know. And we have 50% of the travel and the transportation from travel and transportation app, 30% from the weather and the climate app, 10% from network utilities such as the Wi-Fi findings, QR code, etc., and 10% is many different other things such as the health, astrology. So you can find out there's a majority of the travel and transportation as well as the weather and the climate. That's why then you will think of like this will really, you will see the data as a lot of them along the road, because like sometimes probably you use Google Map or you use like Waze or something else, you're actually recording a location every second or every 5 seconds, something like that. So this really creating some of the bias in the analysis. Spatial coverage, we focus on the Glasgow city area, and this is the boundaries and city centers here. Glasgow University is around here, but we really have the entire Glasgow coverage, including the Glasgow city and the surrounding, I believe, 7 local authorities. So, but you can see, like, if you really drive away from the city, you see most of the impressions along the road, around the networks. So potential applications was this data set. So many things you can think of, and I believe you all have your ideas. You can do something like visitation behavior, trajectory estimation. You can have the site-specific spatial analysis, such as the greenspace analysis I will present in a few minutes. Pre-pandemic and the post-pandemic comparisons, which is everybody wants to know what's going on in the city. We can create an OD matrix from more of transportation perspective, and we can also use this data to estimate the home and the work location. Particularly, I think before COVID is much easier, but after COVID, because people work from home, it creates a new complexity to how to really do it. And we can also couple this data with like different socioeconomic and environmental data set, such as something like social media and demographic data to really understand people's the socioeconomic conditions. So, and how they actually travel. So this is the potential applications, but when we look at the data and we find out that even though we buy 2 years, and we are receiving the data for the 2021, but we really have different volume of the data across the 2 years. So for the 2019, it's actually really low. The entire year, we only have 22.7 million impressions. And a unique user is actually 20K, 20,000. But if you look at 2020, we got 179.5 million impressions. And the unique user is also double, it's about 55,000. And we talk with the company and see why this happens. And they just say, okay, so we keep adding new apps to improve our products, and that's what we have. And we don't really have, better data, and that's what we have. So this really making a comparison of the 2 years a bit difficult, because we cannot really compare the exact number, but we really need to use a percentage to actually do the comparison. So going to the real research about it. So in terms of backgrounds, I think everybody noticed that how important if you live close to a green space during the lockdown. Particularly, like say, engagement with natural areas and green space has increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. And also the better understanding of the human interactions in urban green space is really critical for decision makers to adequately manage and direct resources. And it's really about, like say, because of the COVID-19, all the, like say, local authority, they are kind of lack of resources, lack of money. They even need to reduce some of their staffs. And in that way, how to really, I think it's more like optimization question, like how to really manage and use the resources efficiently. That would be a very key question for them to answer, I think, in 2021, 2022, and also in the next few years. And there's always that inequality exists in a green space accessibility. And I think that everybody agreeing with that. So this is not happened during the pandemic. It's actually existed for a long time. But how we can recover with a better situation, that's something we want to use the data to answer. We actually, after we got this data and we connect with a few of the stakeholders and external partners, and they really interested in our data analysis and invite us to do a presentation in their park managers forum organized by the Green Space Scotland, which is like a forum to encompass in all the stakeholders across Scotland to think about how to use data to better making decisions for green space. And we asked them, like say, we asked them one single question is that we have this mobile phone data. What do you want to use this data for? And the two key areas of interest come back. The first thing is that to evaluate if green space parks and play parks are functioning as expected. So the first thing is about to understand how the parks works. So basically, they try. We have the. Originally we have a survey data. We have those kind of GIS data, but it's really hard to know how people use the park from those kind of more static data set. But the other thing is that to really inform decision making on how to best plan and disseminate resources on the green space. And this is really about a limited budget under the pandemic, because if they don't really have enough money to like adding 100 benches or maybe create a new play areas for the children. But if they have some money to put 5 benches and adding 1 play areas, and where will be the place they will do. So this is something they really need, this kind of detailed data to help answer the questions. So going to more of the data analysis, this is the OS master map of green space, which is available, I think, for the entire UK. And you can find out we have those kind of big public parks across the Glasgow areas, and also some of the amenities, golf course, and small play areas as well. I think Glasgow is kind of famous for its kind of good green space coverage in the city. But if we look at the summary of the open space and in the Glasgow city area, and you can find out, those big areas are the parklands. And for the general open space, they are pretty small, and amenities, they are kind of really small in terms of areas and also count. But by overlapping the open space shapefile, the GA data with the impressions from the mobile phone. And you can find out for the 2 years, we combine it together. So right now we are not talking about anything of the COVID or not. It's not about pandemic, but just adding up all the impressions. And you can find out most of the impressions actually happen in this kind of, because that's the average, right? So the per head. So you can find out in the amenities, you can actually get pretty high mobile phone impressions. It's more than 1,000. And for open space, you get slightly small. But as you can see, like parklands, they have the biggest, that's the biggest areas. And you really cannot imagine that everybody is like have the same density compared to like say something like open space. And here's a few of the major parks in the Glasgow area, including such as the George Square, which is quite small in the city center, Glasgow Green, Alexandra Park, and they are kind of in around like 1,000 per hectare. And Kevin Group Park, which is in Botanic Garden, they are all near the University of Glasgow, really busy green space. I was there multiple times. So they're in the highest impression categories. There's also a few small ones like Queen's Park, Castlemill Parks as well, which has a pretty high impressions. So by looking at the total park impressions across different parks, you can find out those kind of major green space or major parks certainly show up in the list. But we certainly find out some of the very small like amenities and open space also show up in this list, and we don't really have a name for it. So those really give us questions like say, okay, people will love to travel to those big parks, Kevin Group Parks, Glasgow Green, but will those kind of small and a nearby green space actually working also pretty well, especially during the pandemic? Because during the pandemic, there's a limited use of public transportation, and also in some of the more deprived areas, not everyone owns a car. So how to actually allocate those kind of small green space for different neighborhoods and making it more accessible. I would say improve accessibility, which is making it very important for us to think about, like when we see these kind of results and how we can actually improve it. So here's one of the example for the Alexandra Park, pre and during COVID-19 pandemic. And if we look, zoom in a little bit and look at more detail, we find out, okay, even though we know this is a very kind of a median levels that we have around like 300 to 1,000 impressions per hectare, but the majority of the impressions actually, just clustering in the play areas. And I can think of that's more like probably children play areas. Everybody will stay there and children play there, and you probably start using phones, parents start using phones, and you get a lot of impressions there. And by looking at the pre-COVID and the COVID across the one day, we do an average of the percent of the impressions, you can find out before the COVID-19, we certainly have a peak around like say 10 a.m. And we have a few, afternoon peak and evening peaks. But during the COVID-19, because people really shifted their work patterns, so we don't really see this kind of morning peak anymore. So, but we really see like the first period actually during like from 12 to 2, and then we'll still have those kind of a second peak in the afternoon as well, which is quite interesting to observe from data. And if you look at from Monday to Sunday, what's going on comparing to before COVID and after COVID, and we really can find out, like say pre-COVID, we have this Monday to Sunday has the highest impressions in this particular park, but actually during the COVID days, it shifts to Friday and Wednesday, which is quite. And also, I think it's more average in terms of like how it looks like. So it's really a big switch, and from the COVID-19, like for people's life and work patterns. The next one, this one is really like when people visit across the 2020 this year, and we use the weekly rolling average of the visit to this park, and we normalize it. based on the impression number. So this is more like a percentage and also the number of visitors, because we really have a different visitor numbers across the year. But we find out, like say in mid-March, when we have the first lockdown, everything just dropped significantly to really low levels. And we have two lockdown. I mean, there's one lockdown is in May 29th, and there's a major reopening in July 17th. We certainly see some recovery, but it still maintains pretty low until November. It really goes back. But actually, when Glasgow go back to level 4 in November 20th, and then we have I mean, there's actually a steep drop, but it's not really drop as to like in April. It goes back again because people can go out to exercise. And then in December 26th, there's a second lockdown and things just going down again. But it will be interesting to see what's going on, like from January until right now, what's going on right now in Glasgow. So we can certainly see this, like say the first lockdown, everybody really stay home, but in the second lockdown, and this is not really the truth that people will continue to follow rules as the first one. The last part of pilot results is about where people come from. So we try to find out, we identify the people's home locations from the mobile phone app data. And then we map out the visitor homes from different data zones. And you can find out like most of the people, they are actually from within 1 mile, I would say, if you look at the scale here, within 1 mile. We have some people like slightly far away, but mostly like within probably the 2 mile radius, I would say 1 mile radius, I mean, around the park. So this is really make us certainly think of like how to really make a better accessibility for the green space. A few quick summaries for this research, and I think green space vegetation pattern has been changed significantly, particularly during the pandemic. Certainly, I mean, in terms of a time of the day and during the week, like which days they will visit green space more, and also the lockdown limitations as well. But also the local parks and open space become more important for city residents. So we have more discussion right now about like 15 million neighborhoods or like more walkable cities, or maybe we say this kind of pandemic ready city. So I say I mix something, pandemic ready city. So it's like if we have another pandemic again in probably 5 years, and where we do actually better compared to this one. And I think the main take home is that you can find out this kind of mobile phone app data really have that kind of advantage to show how people use the green space in a high spatial temporal manners, which is not even possible for most of those kind of stakeholders. So when they see this kind of data, they're really exciting and talk with us. And we have a 10 minutes presentation. They have about 30 minutes questions. Just like they have so many questions because they never see this data. They don't have the skills to really deal with the data. And this really make them think of like, oh, so how they can use this data to better manage the green space. And it also opens space for us as a researcher to think about how we can really contribute to those kind of policy decisions and implementations. A few limitations. I mean, the first is that we use the impressions, which is, I mean, the points show up for area of the phone locations. But certainly if we can use the start point instead of the impressions, it will be certainly much better. And if we can have the person's trajectories across the park, we can have a better idea. So we know, let's say the person stop in the park for about 20 minutes, rather than they just pass by. Let's say I walk along the park and probably stay there probably only 5 minutes. So it's less like you use the green space, you just travel through. But how to really categorize people that use the green space rather than just travel through, this is something we can do in the near future. And a few of other things we can do, certainly such as including the 2021 data, further collaborate with the policymakers to better allocate resources, such as the benches, such as the new investment for play parks, etc. And really, the next thing is that we really need to understand who has the worst green space accessibilities. And do they really just live in the deprived areas, and what kind of social demographic economic status they have, and how to devise strategy to actually improve it and help. I mean, I think we're talking about pandemic recovery right now, and how to help them recovery through this process. A few of the ongoing research besides of these two research, and I'm leading the urban sensing analytics research work package in the urban big data center, and really focusing on different sensing technologies to help and understand and answer urban questions, including like portable sensing, ambient sensing, remote sensing, etc. And a few existing projects in our sensing package, including like say combining the portable sensors in the mobile survey. We are doing also more like a more ambient sensing, like combining the housing sensors into an enhanced social survey. And we also have the urban remote sensing research and urban climatology research. And the final one is led by Mark in our center, is using the sparse CCTV capacity to monitor activities on the city streets. I think that's all for today from my side, and thanks so much for your time. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave in the chat, and also you can feel free to email me to my Glasgow website, Glasgow emails, and also feel free to explore my personal website and also the UBDC website in terms of the data and the research. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Qunshan, for this very interesting piece of your research. They're wonderful. And so if you have any questions, please do post them in the chat box. And I do have one to ask Qunshan first, so please allow me to ask the questions first. So I really like the field poverty studies, especially the potential of reviewing the field poverties at the postcode level. I think in England, the current available data is only at the LSOA level. So I think this is really interesting and help us to get more sense of the spatial characteristics of these kind of things. This also reminded me of a piece of article that I read before. It's about the Queen is actually 10 years ago, she applied for a field poverty grant to pay the bill to heat her palace. Yeah, so this just highlighted that a lot of people might have this similar kind of problems to pay the bills about the heatings. I have questions about the patterns that have been reviewed. We can see a lot of interesting patterns in the spatial perspective, but I'm wondering, is it possible to use that data to get a sense of the temporal changes over the years? So
Yeah.
can you please share some insight about the future? For example, I know that in Scotland, I think the percentage of the renewable energy is nearly 100%, but it's not the case for the whole UK. I think that with more people starting to use the renewable energy, and sometimes these are a little bit more expensive. So do you think this kind of field poverty issue will become more serious in the future with higher inequities?
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Qunshan, for the question. Very interesting. I think those are very good questions. I think for the first one about the time, right? So that's possible. I think that's possible from the time perspective because we have the specific for different Zoopla data and EPC data. We all have a specific time. But it seems like if we want to do something like for let's say 5 years ago, we have a map, and then after another 5 years, we have another map. There's certainly a discrepancy across it because the EPC data, you don't know when for each postcode, when will the houses or say flats in that postcode will be evaluated. It is not, we don't really control it, right? So it's kind of a natural occurring data, I would say that, based on human will. And for the Zoopla data, it's similar situation. It's kind of also like, you don't really know, like it probably randomly generate, like some areas really hard in terms of rental and some area really hard in terms of selling. And I think the reason that during the pandemic, the reason really hard housing market, I mean, in terms of the property exchange and the rental, it will actually generate a good amount of the data on Zoopla and the EPC. So I think I would really think of like before to really doing this kind of time series comparisons, we really need to understand, like say, what percentage of the Zoopla data really cover entire Scotland, and what percentage of the EPC data we really have for each of postcode, probably we say that. And then we can think of like, if we can do this time series in a more representative way. I mean, there's another option. So we have a land registry data in Scotland, right? So we can easily get in every house. If you like sold, we get a little price in the past probably 30 years. So that's another way to do it. But when we really focus on private rentals, probably Zoopla is kind of the only way, and especially for the kind of long-term rental. I mean, Airbnb is more like short-term rental, but if you look at a long-term rental, it's more for Zoopla or Rightmove. So that's probably the only way to get this data. So I think for the time dimensions, yeah, it's a great question, but I think we really need to think about like how to make sure it actually works. Otherwise, you divide the data and you're just getting kind of bias in both ways. It's not working. For your second question, can you remind me? Sorry.
It's about some future scenarios. For example, with more people starting to use renewable energy, which is a bit more expensive. So do you think this kind of fuel poverty issue will become more serious with higher inequities in the future?
To be honest, I don't know. First, I use a 100% renewable energy provider in my home. It's actually cheaper than all the major providers. So, but I think for general people, like when they use it, I don't know how these kind of renewable resources, or maybe we have a COP26, we're coming in Glasgow this November, everybody talking about that in Glasgow, but how this will really factor into the electricity price. And I think this is more like a market-driven thing. It's less, I mean, technology-wise, I think it's pretty stable. And I think Scotland, probably a lot of electricity kind of moved to England, and I know a lot of them even sold to France or Germany. So this is like kind of like a really the entire electricity market. So I don't really know the answer for this one. But in general, I would say the climate change, or say the low carbon society we want to build will certainly influence those kind of deprived people. And particularly, like say, if we ask them to do something specific, and at the very beginning, it will probably cost more money, I think, at the very beginning. And how to really help them and have those kind of policy to help them is very important to think about. Yeah. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thanks. This answers my question. And next is Danny. Yeah, I see Danny raised his hand.
Yeah, I think well, thanks very much, Qunshan. My question is actually the same as Mark, or very similar to the one Mark posted in the chat. I was wondering if you could give us a sense. I think one of the most interesting aspects of your work is that you're really taking this analysis of data to the real world. And I guess I was wondering, how do you tackle, and what's your experience like with policymakers in trying to convey to them that the map they're seeing is not the map of everyone moving around the park, is the map of everyone with a smartphone and with an app that is, pinging whatever server, and that doesn't mean the data is useless, but it means that you need to be careful about that. So I guess my question is a bit twofold. On the technical side, do you do anything to try to work around the biases between the sample and the population? And then on the more applied work, how do you go about convincing people that what they're seeing is not ultimate truth, that it's a tool that, like anyone else, like any other one, is subject to biases and shortcomings?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Danny. I mean, that's very good question. And I think when we do, I mean, go to your first question from technical side. For when we use this kind of, we say new forms of urban big data or whatever, and the one thing we really need to do, and most of the research lacks, is basically the validation process. And when you have this kind of new data, everybody get excited. Oh, that's great. We can understand something more in terms of human behavior, but how this will say reliable. And in terms of validation, we have done a few things. For Zoopla Data, so the entire housing research group in UBDC, they compare the Zoopla data with the official statistics from ONS, I believe. And I believe they have a working paper on the website. But the general things that they basically find a pretty good correlations in terms of the rent price. So basically, from a price perspective, that's very accurate, and it can kind of represent the situation across the area. And for this kind of mobile phone data, it's biased. As I mentioned, it's only like 80% of the data is from the map apps as well as the weather apps. But our validation is really that we generate. So one way is from the hard data, they don't only have like latitude, longitude, and the time. So they have a few other columns. And there's one column is about the categories. So, and I think for that categories, it's not categories, but basically like say, I would say like the location, it has like a diagnostic tag, which says that's at home. So we use the data to estimate the home location, and then we compare with that tag and see how accurate it is. But the other way to do it is that we really generate the trajectories based on the mobile phone apps. And then we compare with, different things. The Scottish Travel Survey, and we compare with a few other surveys, I believe. And also we recently get another set of the mobile phone signal data in Scotland. And we try to compare this mobile phone app data with that data and see how it works. And as I mentioned in my final slide about the new research, we have the evaluation of the portable sensors in a mobile survey. And that's actually, we try to collect, doing a mobile survey, giving people mobile phones, ask them to move around, and we want to collect some of the survey results to help validate our mobile phone app data as well. But that one is kind of paused because of the COVID-19, but we may resume probably in later this year or next year. So that's the technical side. But when you talk about talk to research with the stakeholders, yeah, I think you need to make it really clear, because they also ask these kind of questions, like how not everybody use mobile phone, right? And you're probably only talking about young people, and you're probably only talking about say, it's not only young people, but I would say elderly people, and say if they are people live in deprived areas, they probably use less. And we have a meeting like before this talk and to discuss these kind of demography issues. But from a few of the demographic comparisons, and we know, like, if we really focus on the travel patterns, most of the elderly people, they travel less. And the patterns we discuss about like kind of, if we create an OD matrix or like trajectories in a green space, that's, we need to admit there's bias, but certainly I can kind of confidently say the bias is not like high. And I don't have a statistical table right now to say this is not high or low, but I think we are working with to actually generate that kind of thing based on the official statistics to base, and also the mobile phone survey. How many? I think a survey they say like what age of people they own the mobile phones and smartphones. And yeah, and also it's getting much better. For elderly people, they start to use smartphones as well. So yeah, we actually receive fundings from Glasgow City Council to really focus on these kind of mobile phone projects and on various different things. So they really trust us to do the work, and they see the values to using this kind of data set. Yeah, hope I answer your questions. Yeah, it's great questions.
Thanks, Qunshan, for this. So, Mark, do you want to? I think this question is similar to Danny's, right?
Hi, yeah, thanks for the talk. It's really good. I guess Danny's question kind of covers mine. I guess just to pick it apart a little bit more, when you say that the confidence you have in your data not being biased is high, do you mean that the bias compared to smartphone users? Do you mean the bias compared to your population for Glasgow? So like, is hook data representative of all social groups? Is it, you know, or is it representative just of mobile phone users, or is it representative just of hook users? Who is your population in this?
Right. I would say firstly, it's not the Hug users. So let's just let they just aggregate all the mobile phone apps together. But I mean, in Hug data, first we don't have any children data, so everything will be age greater than 16 years old. That's the first thing, because of ethics, we will not be, that's not allowed it. But when we're talking about adults, and there are two things, right? So first thing is that the population who use smartphones. The second thing is by the entire population in the Glasgow. And so the comparison is that really comparing we don't have demographic data for Hug, so we don't really know who's, within the Hug data, who is really being collected. So we don't have that information. But the thing is that we are generating different results, right? Say how people visit the green space, how people visit, the trajectory with their home locations. And the things we can really to understand is that, say, who is actually using the smartphones for different age groups. So I think that's straightforward. Young people use a lot, probably 90%, but it drops down for the elderly people. And for the entire population, that's also important to know. Like say, and when I have a conversation with Glasgow City Council, and they mention about like Glasgow is a relatively young city, which we have a lot of the students, about 10% of the population, and also we have a lot of working classes in the Glasgow city area. So that means in Glasgow, we also have a pretty high young populations, and elderly people is actually, so it's actually quite similar picture in terms of the Glasgow population profile and a smartphone user profile. And that gives us a better, we can probably relatively confidently say, okay, so these patterns can show pretty well in terms of how people visit a green space, because we know like elderly people, their mobility is less, and we mostly kind of, the smartphone data is represent young people, and we have mostly young people in the Glasgow, and the patterns is about like how young people actually visit different green space or different areas. So that's kind of I say relatively confident, but we have less statistical tables we show today actually in our chats, and I'm happy to talk more about it. Like say, if you have any ideas about to kind of validate it, and happy to talk about it. Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Qunshan, for this. Any other questions? Please post in the chat box or just to raise your hand. Okay, it seems that we do not have any other questions. So I think I'm going to close these sessions for today. And just a reminder that we will upload the recordings to our YouTube channel, and you can have a playback and share this with your colleagues and friends who has missed it. So thanks again for Qunshan's great talk, and thank you everyone for joining us today.